And my name is Freya Anderson, and I'm from the Alaska State Library. And today my plan is to talk a little bit about the resources that are available for free or to all Alaska residents online for learning about Alaska history. And as you may imagine, the quantity of resources available is much, much greater than I could possibly cover in a 45-minute session. So I'll be going over some good examples, and then there is a resource guide which I'll show to you that will include how to access the examples that I present, and also how to find a lot of other neat resources. So the resources I'll be covering today are in three broad areas of genealogy, historical research, and lessons, which includes both materials for students and materials for teachers. Many of the resources actually may be helpful for multiple areas, but that's kind of the focus. So when you look at the resource guide, you may want to just check out the items in the other sections from the one that you're focusing on. And the type of information found falls into two main categories. One is where it's the full information, the full text, whether it's long or short, is completely online. And then there are finding aids, where information about how to find out what's available is online, but you may need to contact either the state library or the state archives or some other agency to actually get the full text. And you may actually need to visit some location in order to access that full content. Because there's so much to cover, I wanted to get some idea of what type of information you particularly are interested in. And so I've put up a poll. You should see letter A, and if you mouse over it, it's in the participants box, and if you mouse over it, it'll give you A, B, C, D, or none. And if you just choose the one that matches what you're looking for, I'll cover each of these a little bit, but can focus more on what you're specifically looking for. Does anybody besides Mike have any comment on this? If you're having trouble, oh great, got that typed into chat. So it looks like mostly looking for historical research, primary resources, and genealogy. Like I mentioned, I will touch base on some of these others as well. And there will be resources beyond what I cover for all of these categories. So right now, I'm actually going to stop sharing this, and instead, I'm going to share my browser. And just a second while I get this. So if you can see, there's a picture of me, and it says Alaska History Resources. It's got a bunch of links. If you can see that, can you just either raise your hand or type in chat to let me know? Okay, fantastic. So what I've put here on this guide is broken this out into different types of resources. Like I mentioned earlier, we have historical research, K-12, and genealogy, but then I've also put over onto the left-hand side starting places. And those are places where you can find a lot of what I've highlighted here in all of these categories, as well as additional materials. In particular, I'd like to point out SLED. Let's just go look at that really quick. SLED is a resource created by librarians around the state that highlights the best possible free resources available for Alaska residents. And right now, I am logged in, so it's not going to, there we go. Now that'll look like what it'll look like for you. And in particular on SLED, there are a couple of categories that I'd like to point out. The first is, not surprisingly, arts, literature, and history. And if you notice here, the section is broken out within that topic, but with a focus on Alaska. So when we look at Alaska history, these are all specific to Alaska. And if you scroll down, then there is more general information down at the bottom of the screen. But there are some great resources towards the top. And each of the categories follow this general pattern of having Alaska-related resources at the top and general resources at the bottom. Another resource that's available from SLED, but is also linked on the guide that I was showing you, is Alaska's Digital Archives. We'll touch base on that in a little bit. And the digital pipeline, which is primarily magazine journal articles and reference sources, but also another resource that I'll mention that's great for kids called BrainPop. And there's a surprising amount of Alaska history-related material in some of these databases, so they can be really helpful. Hopping back to our resource guide, here's that Alaska Digital Pipeline I mentioned from the SLED page, but here it is linked on the guide. And then I've also linked to some resources from key agencies around the state. In particular, I'd also like to mention this Alaska State Library Joint Library Catalog. There are a lot of paper books, but also e-books available to users within state government or within many communities around the state that you will find through this joint library catalog. And I'm going to just take a quick moment to go in and look at that, because I wanted to point out, especially for those doing research, how you can access both paper and electronic resources through the catalog. This catalog itself is a cooperative catalog, so it covers libraries throughout Juneau and also quite a few libraries around South Central Alaska. So I just did a really general search here on Alaska history, and if, say, you weren't near one of the participating libraries or you were particularly looking for an electronic resource, you can easily limit that by just clicking here under Format, Electronic Resource, and then Include. And then this brings up resources that are available online, and either at this front portion or after you click through into the item record, there should be a link. There are links to connect you directly to that resource. If you want to limit it even further to electronic books, most of the electronic books are items that are available to all state employees through eBrary, or to many people around the state or all state employees through Listen Alaska, which includes ebooks as well as audiobooks. And you can just look at these links and click on the appropriate one. In this case, it would be ASL state agency employees, and that would take you to the eBrary record for Fur Farms of Alaska by an author here in Juneau. You can do all sorts of things with these, including you can check the books out or download small portions of the books. And then just to show you what it looks like from Listen Alaska, if we wanted to look at an Alaskan book from Listen Alaska, this particular one has a couple of holds on it. You could just click to place a hold, and then it would prompt you to log in using your usually using your barcode on your library card. And if you have any trouble accessing either Listen Alaska or eBrary books, please don't hesitate to contact us, and we'd be happy to walk you through that. Initially on Listen Alaska, there was not a lot of Alaska content, but we've really, well, Listen Alaska Overdrive has made a lot more of Alaska content available, and we really try to purchase Alaska content for this whenever we can. So there's a fair amount there. And going back to our guide, because interest was especially expressed in historical research and genealogy, I'm going to start right up here at the top of the page and go in a little more depth in going through some of the items available for historical research. First of all, I'd like to point out Alaska's digital archives. Hopefully this is familiar to many of you already, but this is an amazing resource. It is a cooperative project, and within state government, the state library has materials, both from the historical collections and from state publications, as well as the Alaska State Archives has content. However, there's also content from quite a few other institutions around the state. I'm going to just do a quick search in here on Juneau mining. And here we see the different collections that have items that mention Juneau mining. And you can limit your searches by subject or by the type of material. Materials in Alaska's digital archives include extensive photograph collections, but also primary documents, audio files, and even video files. I'm going to click on this very first one, which is a map. And you may be able to see it's kind of smallish, but that looks like, you can see up in this corner, this blue section that's covering the entire item. And you can make that bigger by not covering the entire item, by just moving this slider. And now it's a really close look at a small portion, and you can see over in the corner that blue portion is now right in the middle And you can move that blue portion around to a different part if there's a specific part that you would like to see. You can download this file in small, medium, and large, and you can print it. If you would like to use this file in some way other than for your own personal research, or say for a school paper, then you should scroll down and look at the description that is available for each of these files. And in particular, you want to look at ordering and use. And this will be different for different items because the different institutions have different policies. If you want a high quality file, you can often order those from the institution that put them up. And then they also may specify some restrictions on use. Are there any questions so far? Okay, moving on ahead. The next item that I wanted to point out is from the Alaska State Archives. They have a ton of information. They've really been quite proactive about putting information online. But I particularly wanted to show the Alaska Constitutional Convention recordings because I just think these are so exciting. When you first click on that, that gives you links to the recordings for each individual day, as well as for more information about the collection and transcripts. Let's just look at the first day. Once we get here, again, we can see the transcripts. We can also play the recordings, or we can download them to play them later. The files are fairly large, so downloading them may be your best idea if you're wanting to listen to extensive portions. Let's just see if we can hear just a little bit. So that's just a brief taste, and I hope the audio came through for you okay. One thing that I think is really special about this is that it's beneficial for people who are researching the topic, but it also brings an important part of Alaska history to life for students. It's great for classrooms, especially if you pick out specific parts maybe related to an aspect that your class is wanting to focus on. I actually get a little emotional when I'm listening to these because it's just so real, and you know, most states don't have that opportunity because their beginnings were so much further back, but we do, and it's a gift, I think. There's one other thing that I want to show you about right now related to related to doing historical research specifically, and that is a sneak preview of the search that is going to be coming onto the SLED website soon. And the search that is currently available for searching the digital pipeline and the resources that I mentioned there, the general search is a little bit clunky, and so oftentimes you want to go in and pick out databases and do individual searches. But coming very soon, we should have a search that will allow us to search a bunch of them together. So just putting in, Alaska history. This is very broad, but you can see all sorts of information coming up. Now there is Wikipedia, but we also do have resources from the University of Alaska Fairbanks' Alaska and Polar regions. We have resources from Alaska's Digital Archives, which I just showed you, as well as scholarly articles and general news articles, images again. So if we scroll back up to the top, we can see that we got over 57,000 results just on Alaska history. If we look over here on the publication date, we can see that these results go back to 1922 and come up to the modern times. So watch for that coming soon. I'd like to look a little bit at some of the genealogy resources available. Before we jump into that, does anybody have any questions so far? Okay. So the first thing I'd like to touch base on is some resources available from the National Archives. You may have seen some news recently about the National Archives Anchorage office closing down soon. This is actually completely unrelated to this. This is from the National Archives. And so this should stay available. There shouldn't be any change for this. This is a section of the National Archives called Access to Archival Databases. And in particular, I wanted to point out military personnel, because a lot of people in Alaska have military connections, either current or in the past. So this brings up a whole bunch of different record groups, but if you notice this second record group here, this is actually enlistment records from World War II. And if we come over to the sort of towards the right of the item, we can look at the enlistment records. And just put, you can do more advanced searching by using the fields below, but if we just type in Alaska, and I'm going to put Anderson because that's my last name, even though I'm not military, and just do a quick search. And then you'll see we have actual military records for people who are either from Alaska or enlisted in Alaska, and whose last name is Anderson. And if we click on this little page on the left-hand side where it says View Record, you can actually see a fair amount of detail about that enlistment. I was really surprised when I found this one when I was doing research for this presentation. Last time I went into the National Archives looking for this type of information, I wasn't able to find it directly. I was able to find citations, but then would have had to contact the National Archives for the actual information. So this is really exciting to see this information available online. Going back to SLED, I'd like to point out a database from Alaska's digital pipeline called Heritage Quest Online. And in particular, I'd like to point out the Census Search here. I did a search on Thompson for this one because my family came to Alaska early on, and that side of my family's last name is Thompson. Now, the thing to be aware of is we don't have anything for Alaska from 1930, so I'm going to go to 1940. And alas, I did not find my family. It turned out that right around the times of the censuses, the family went back to Iowa. But we do find 153 results in the Alaska Territory. If you know your specific district, then you can click on those. Otherwise, you can just choose the territory as a whole. And you can see a listing of names. And then if we click through, this sometimes takes a little while to load up, and the quality of the images is quite variable. But it seems like they've done a fair amount of work to clean them up, and it's the ones that I've been looking at recently seem to have a better image quality, more readable than ones that I looked at earlier. But if you look at this very first line, it may be faint for you, but it says Thompson Alice, and she's a wife. And then it gives more information about Alice Thompson as well. There are other resources available in Heritage Quest as well. Most of the resources that are available through Heritage Quest really are focused more on areas outside of Alaska. So if you have family not from Alaska that you're trying to research prior to when they came here, then a lot of these resources may be helpful. We're always looking at other resources for the databases, and just recently started exploring another one related to genealogy. We'll see how that works if we're able to get that. But also, you might pay attention at your own personal libraries. Sometimes libraries have additional subscriptions to things like Ancestry.com, which would provide additional information. And coming back to our guide, I'd like to point out this Alaska Genealogy from the Alaska State Library. This has got a whole bunch of other resources. General resources and specific resources for Anchorage, Juneau, Fairbanks, and other Alaska towns. And it includes both paper and electronic resources. Not surprisingly, if it's electronic, there will be a link and you can click through to it. If it's not electronic and there is no link, then anything that is on this list we have here at the State Library, and you should feel free to contact us. We're happy to do lookups. So if you have a specific name that you're looking for, you think they might be, they might have been in excuse me, in Dawson around the turn of the century, of the previous century, or maybe somebody who may have passed away and might be in the Anchorage Times obituary index. We can do lookups for those. And some of these are most likely available in some of the other, well, are available in many of the other libraries around the state as well. The one other thing I'd like to point out related to this that is not actually available online but that we can do lookups for is something called PolarPack. We're hoping to get that online too, but right now we have that as a very old CD-based database. So there's something that we have listed here under historical research called Alaska Polar and Periodical Index, and that has Alaska-related articles from journals and newspapers. PolarPack has the same content as the Alaska Polar and Periodical Index up through 1998, but it also has many different Alaskan indexes and directories. The content has been added into them. So things like the rolls from the Pioneers of Alaska igloos, or quite a few business directories, old Alaskan business and Yukon business directories. That content has been added in there. And so we can do a fairly quick search on there that may save a lot of time in looking up all the individual resources. Again, that isn't available online, but if you would like a lookup, please don't hesitate to contact us about that. Are there any questions so far about either historical research sources or genealogy sources? Okay, well, I'm going to move on a little bit to lessons, and once I go through a little bit of K-12 material, then we can always go back and go through any of these other resources that you may notice here that you'd like to learn a little bit more about, or if you'd like to go back into more detail of any of the resources we've covered already. So the first one that I'd like to touch base on here is actually the very first one listed under K-12 materials. It's the Alaska History and Cultural Studies. And I just wanted to touch on this because this gives such a lovely overview going through natural history, culture, Russian America, the territory of Alaska and becoming a state, and into more modern times. You can do this by timeline or by going through over this way. And it's a pretty there's quite a bit of content here. You can either go in and look at the specific aspects that you're interested in, or if you're looking for a general history of Alaska, you can just read through this. And I've personally gone through mostly with following the timeline, and found it was really interesting and helpful to see sort of what was happening here, what was happening elsewhere at the same time, all the way through to fairly present times. the next item I wanted to mention is another timeline. It's almost halfway down this list. It says Timeline of Alaska's History, and it's from the Alaska Public Lands Information Centers. The Alaska Public Lands Information Centers are cooperative of state and federal agencies that that deal with parks and other land issues, and there are centers in several locations around the state. And back in my days when I worked at a visitor center, we used to send people to the Public Lands Information Centers all the time because they have such great stuff. And this is a good example of some of the great stuff that they have. Again, you can go through to specific time periods. But on this one, you may notice there are links throughout, and you may notice here that that this is blocked for me because it's filtered. I'm going to log in. I had logged in earlier today, and I thought it was going to remember that, but apparently it didn't. So there are some embedded videos. This one is fairly long. It's about a half an hour, and it goes through natural history and cultural history as well. But then there are links to different resources from the National Park Service, from the Fish and Wildlife Service, or from the Alaska Public Lands Information Center itself. So it's more than just a simple timeline, but there's extensive information provided throughout for those areas that you want more detail. And that one video that was on the front page was the only one there, but most of the pages that I've found have include at least one video, although most of the ones that I found are quite a bit shorter than that one on the front page. I think this is just great for finding out a little bit more about the state in general, but then also for being able to really dig into those areas that are intriguing or that a class specifically wants to cover. So the next one I'd like to touch base on is the Alaska Kids Corner. And this is actually from the State of Alaska website. It may be pretty familiar to some of you already, but even though we didn't put it together here at the State Library, I think they did an awesome job of pulling together great information. This covers, as you can see, a lot more than just history. There's general facts about Alaska. The misconceptions one is kind of fun. But if you do click through into history, you can find some really great information, including here's another link to Alaska's digital archives. But for example, if we wanted to look at some more information about World War II, this is written to a fairly young audience. So this is, well, I'm not a school educator, but I would tend to think that this would be ideal for upper elementary to middle school. But certainly aspects would be useful for younger kids as well. There's one more thing that I have on my list to show you, and it's called Brain Pop. Now, I am not myself a huge fan of Brain Pop because, well, I think I'm a bit older than its target audience. But having said that, this is hugely popular among kids in Alaska. Once they find out about this from their friends, they jump in and they use the movies and the games to just learn, and lots of information, science and social studies and math and different areas. But to learn this information, thanks Bethany, to learn this information while playing. So I think they don't even realize that they're learning. So there isn't a ton in Brain Pop specifically related to Alaska, but there is some. And because this is just so effective for kids, I wanted to point it out. The one thing I also want to point out is that throughout the website, Brain Pop tends to encourage you to log in and to subscribe. The state already subscribes to the main Brain Pop, so you should be able to access most of the movies. Well, you should be able to access the movies directly without paying for a subscription. So if you have any trouble accessing something, don't hesitate to contact us. But either way, if you have kids at home who might be interested in this, or if you teach, I would encourage you to check it out. Well, that brings me to the end of my brief taste of Alaska History Resources Online. If anybody has any questions, I'll be around for a little bit longer. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, I apologize for the little snafu with the URL, but I'm glad you found the right URL and made it in. And thanks for joining us.